University in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In charge of the PhD in English program at the Department of English at Air University in Islamabad, faculty member at the American Language Institute in Doha, Qatar, and faculty member at the College of Electrical and Mechanical Engineering of NUST. Dr. Inayatullah is currently working as Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English Graduate Studies at NUML, Islamabad, where he teaches literary theory, 9/11 fiction, post-colonial literature, modern poetry, and American literature. Please welcome Dr. Inayatullah on stage. Thank you very much, sir, for your presence in today's session. Our fourth panelist for today is another highly intellectual name, Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari. Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari is Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Graduate Studies at NUML, Islamabad. She received her PhD in Modern Literature from the Amsterdam School of Cultural Analysis. Her PhD project was on the representations of Istanbul in Orhan Pamuk's opera and his engagement with the nation-state mediated through the city space. She has worked on the musealization of the city, itinerant identities in urban spaces, and more recently, on decolonizing knowledge and research methodology in humanities. Her research interests include decolonization, urban cultures, nomadology, and modernity. Please give a huge round of applause for Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. These are the wonderful panelists for this literary talk show. And now, most important, the moderator for this talk show is our very own and very scholarly Dr. Rabia Amir. Dr. Rabia Amir is Assistant Professor of English at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, NUML, Islamabad, an HEC approved supervisor and former awardee of PhD Research Fellowship at the Department of English and Comparative Literature, Columbia University. Examining the environmental ethical concerns in the literatures of Kashmir and Palestine as her doctoral research project, she has a teaching experience of more than 20 years at different levels and is a recipient for the Best University Teacher Award of the year 2021-22. With her well-cited publications and presentations at numerous international conferences, she also contributes poetry to magazines and anthologies. Dr. Rabia has experience of conducting various faculty developmental programs, moderating several talks, and doing several voiceovers for documentaries. Her recent contributions include book chapters and a petite poetic memoir about the times of her growing up in Lahore. And her upcoming book, Environmental Ethics, Life Narratives from Kashmir and Palestine, is due in early 2023. Her research domain includes American fiction, Native American literature, post-9/11 Pakistani fiction, Middle Eastern and Kashmiri literature, and visual literary narratives, film studies, post-colonial environmental ethics. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. Please give a huge round of applause for our moderator. Over to you, Madam Rabia.
Thank you so much, dear. Assalamu alaikum, my esteemed colleagues and my dear students. ELS brings to you a refreshingly interesting talk show entitled Genre and Crisis. Well, our very own Cudden in Penguin Dictionary of Literary Terms define genre, as I quote, genre, he writes, a French term for a kind of a literary type or class. The major classical genres were epic, tragedy, lyric, comedy, and satire. You must all be familiar with all these. To which would now be added novels and short stories, he writes. From the Renaissance until well on into the 18th century, the genres were carefully distinguished, and writers were expected to follow the rules prescribed for them. In contemporary times, the literary and the non-literary genres have increasingly resisted the closure of their boundaries. Most of the literary genres have thus become restrictive in that they apparently refuse to provide form and direction to both creative and reading processes. An erasure or a blurring of the genre boundaries is happening that might fit into late capitalist priorities, but it has raised vexing questions on the conventional purism of genres and their authority. Likewise, it is at once disconcerting, liberating, and intriguing to think that contemporary readers are in for negotiating this fluidity, and it calls for attention. So therefore, it's going to be an exciting event, everybody, and I must say, thought-provoking session also. So without much ado, we are going to start, and we will ask 2 rounds of questions to our worthy panelists, and followed by a question-answer session, which is going to be with you. So shall we begin? All right. So my first question to our first panelist, Dr. Inayatullah, is that what has in fact happened in contemporary times that has thrown this literary genres into a crisis?
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Dr. Rabi Ahmed, for the introduction to today's session. And before I proceed, I would like to thank the English Literary Society for arranging this session on such an important topic. And I would also like to welcome our honorable guest, Dr. Rusa Kamal from Islamic University, for taking out time out of her busy schedule. All right, so first I would try to unpack the topic for you, genre in crisis. When you watch a superhero movie, what do you usually expect? You usually expect that there will be a superhero, not just a hero, but a superhero with some traits, some abilities and capabilities which we do not usually associate with ordinary men, ordinary people. For example, Captain America. And then you expect that there will be fight going on, there will be clashes, and that superhero will come to the rescue of human beings. This is what we associate with superhero movies. But why do we do that? Similarly, when there is a dystopian fiction, a piece of dystopian fiction, what do we expect there in that case? Or for example, in a post-apocalyptic movie, a movie that shows us a post-apocalyptic scenario, we usually associate certain traits with that movie. We feel that there is something that went horribly wrong because of an experiment that went wrong, a scientific experiment, or because of, let's say, climate change, or because of any other reason, but something went terribly wrong and human beings, their survival was badly shaken and all that. Now these 3 different kinds of texts or movies have I mentioned. First, superhero, second, dystopian, third one is post-apocalyptic. When you hear of Captain America, when you know about a kind of movie that is like that, you associate certain traits with that. Why is that? Because they belong to that particular genre. That is a category in literature or literary studies that you associate certain qualities with that. For example, let me make it simple to you. The first categorization that came of literary texts, that was with Aristotle. Because everything was considered as poetry at that time, he categorized poetry into three branches. 1, tragedy, 2, comedy, and 3, epic. But this categorization didn't stay there forever. with the changing condition of human beings and with the changing circumstances, there was a lot of addition, deletion to these categories. And the process went on, and now we are in the 21st century. Whenever a change was made into a category, I mean genre. Now, if you ask me what are the genres that we have right now, there is this book, 30-second literature, 30-second literature, and they enumerate as many as 34 genres in fiction, genres in literature. There are some genres which are pure, some which are hybrid. By pure we mean, let's say, poetry, and then we have drama, and then we have fiction for that matter, or prose. So it's been a continuous process. There has been a trend that prose and poetry were mixed, and we usually associate it with the current age or the present day. We say this is prose poetry or Nasri Nazm for that matter in Urdu, but that didn't happen today. In 12th century, Hogarth Bologna, he for the first time came up with the concept of prosimetris. In 12th century, remember, this is how they played with the categories. Prosimetris, prose, so prose of course, metris of course, so poetry in 12th century, remember, way back. And in that, by prosimetris they meant that a kind of literary text that can carry sections from both poetry and prose. So can you see how the standalone category or genre was given a dent at that time? And not only that, the very famous Italian Dante Alighieri, his very famous The Divine Comedy of around 14,000 lines, that's considered as written in first person. That's considered as a long poem, a very long poem, but have you ever noticed that there is a lot of prose in that as well? And then we come down to, let's say, 1780s, William Black, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, 1780. Again, genres were mixed, and there you see that there is a lot of poetry going on, and in the middle there is prose as well. So it's a mixture of both. So the kind of strict categorization that we usually associate with genres, that's not that strict. And when we say that, so it's been going on and on. And the title that suggests as if genre is in crisis. So I wondered, how is genre in crisis? Genre has always been enriched. It's been given more and more forms. For example, from pure genre to hybrid genre. For example, tragedy is one genre and comedy is another. Tragicomedy is then a hybrid genre that we have. Documentary is completely non-fiction, but then fiction is of course fictional. Docu-fiction. So what do we do in that is that we make a documentary, but there are certain things that we cannot find happening. We cannot find happening place in real life world. So what we do is, in order to make that documentary impactful, we make, we present a fictional portrayal of those events or those parts of those things. So when we say genre is in crisis, it means its existence is at risk for that matter. It means we are associating certain things with the genre which it won't like for itself. For example, when free verse came into being, when people started using free verse and all the metrical composition was done away with and all the rhyming scheme and all that was done away with, because this is what free verse is. When there is no meter and no rhyming scheme and all that. A very famous poet like Robert Frost, he says that writing in free verse is like playing tennis without a net. And then you see how successful free verse has been. It's been making rounds, and people sort of look down upon poems nowadays which follow the metrical composition and all that. So free verse is the is the need of the hour that we have right now. Now, so I personally don't feel that genre is in crisis. It's expanding with every passing day. For example, how many of you know doodle fiction? Doodle fiction. One of the categories in 21st century, doodle fiction. How many of you have read The Diary of a Wimpy Kid? That's one example of doodle fiction. Because doodle as a font has been used in that. Doodling is an activity, doodling is an art, and we are in 21st century, and this is a kind of enrichment that we have towards genre. A completely new genre has emerged all of a sudden. And then we have this coming of age novel, coming of age. This was, I don't think that was there before 1960s, coming of age novel. And then young adult fiction, fiction that talks about the issues which are pertinent to or exclusive to people between the age of 12 and 18. People between the age of 12 and 18, young adult fiction. That category came somewhere in 1980. So can you see, from Aristotle to Hogarth, Bologna, to William Black, to young adult fiction, to hybridization of genres. So genre has been on the route to enrichment, not to extinction. So I don't feel really, to be honest, that genre is in crisis. All right, because it has responded to the emerging trends, it has responded to our needs and all that. Another example, microfiction, all right, and then flash fiction. On the one hand, we have microfiction, which can be as short as 100 words for that matter. And on the other hand, in old days, we had Paradise Lost, comprising of so many books. Dante's Divine Comedy, 14,000 lines, and then William Black's text. With the passage of time, we know how busy human beings have become, so we then go for splash fiction, we then go for flash fiction, microfiction, and all that. Now let me take you, and then you will be asking for a reason for that. What's the reason for that? Why do authors and poets and novelists and short story writers do that? I would like to quote Victor Shklovsky's art is a technique. He was associated with this Russian formalism, and he wrote this essay, Art is a Technique. Now what he says there in that essay, that may be an old essay, but that still holds water. He first of all differentiates between the language that we use in an ordinary life and the language that is used by poets. And as the title suggests, art as a technique, he says that art is a technique. Now what is that technique? Where does it come into play? It comes into play when you try to make similar things unsimilar, or dissimilar or familiar things unfamiliar. And he says that this is what then makes the difference. This is how you give literariness to issues which are so ordinary in life. And then he says that, for example, and I would explain it, this isn't what he says, I'm explaining it. He says that, for example, you, in ordinary life, in everyday life, you have to reach from point A to point B. Now, in ordinary life, you will go straight from point A to point B and the story ends there. But an artist will take you first from point A to point B and then to point C. So instead of displacement, he is taking you through that. Now, why do artists do that? He says that by means of poetic devices, a poet will make familiar issues unfamiliar to you. And then he will try to create ambiguity by means of using words with their second or third meanings. So when you read them, you do not stop there and then. You come back to them again, to have a look at them again. And this is how then familiar things are made unfamiliar to you, and this is how then the concept of defamiliarization comes into existence. Defamiliarization. What do poets usually do, or what do novelists usually do, irrespective of any genre that we talk about? The things that they talk about are familiar things, but the way they say it, that then makes it defamiliarized, and that is where literariness comes into play. It's very similar to what Saif later on then says, "Andaz bayan rang badal deta hai Saif," and all that. So have a look at any couplet in your own language, in Saraiki, in Pashto, in Urdu, in English. It's stuff from ordinary life, but this is how then they defamiliarize it. And where are these genres then? They are, so whatever text or whatever movie you watch, that of course falls into one category or one genre. I'll give you one example, just one example from microfiction. This incident of Army Public School happened, and you know, innocent kids were killed and all that. Now here is a mother who then, of course, the feelings of a mother are expressed in literary language. There was this online platform, Terribly Tiny Tales, TTT, which, you know, then of course published these pieces of microfiction. Army School incident happens, everyone knows about that, we talk about that. Now have a look at its artistic portrayal. My chest hurts, Ami. Allah, now this is the girl who's going to school, and then the mother replies. Now the girl says, my chest hurts, Ami, and the mother replies, Allah will punish you for lying, go to school. Years have passed, her chest never stops hurting. Now, first of all, you will come back to it again and again, and that will remind you of that. One other example of microfiction that may sound perhaps on a lighter note. It says, "Give me a second chance. Give me a second chance," he said for the third time. Another example, and that will of course be the last one from microfiction. There was this anthology of really short stories published, and the editor is Jerome Stern, anthology of really short stories. The title of the book is Microfiction, anthology of really short stories. I would read out just one example from there, and it's titled as A Gentleman's C. A Gentleman's C, grade C, A, B, C, the grades that we usually achieve. My father, trying to finally graduate from college at 62, came by curious circumstance to be enrolled in an English class I taught. And I was perhaps a bit tougher on him than I was on the others. Hadn't he been tougher on me than on other people's kids growing up? I gave him a hard, honest, low C. About what I felt, he had always given me. We had a death in the family, and my mother and I traveled to the funeral. My father stayed put. To complete his exams. It was his final term. On the way home, we learned that he had received his grades, which were low enough in the aggregate to prevent him from graduating. And reading this news on the dowdy sofa inside the front door, he leaned over as if to rest and had a heart attack and died. For years, I had thought the old man's passing away would not affect me, but it did. Microfiction. Now bring it in comparison to any of the longer texts that the other genres will provide you. So equal in quality, equal in content, but different in style, different in tone, and different in its arrangement. So this is how it is. Every genre stands as a category, and every genre offers us something new, and every genre has a different readership. Children's literature, that's for a different category. Science fiction for a different category. Everyone must have watched Divergent. Now, where do we categorize it? Can we place it in just one category? I don't think so. It's fantasy, it's dystopia and all that. So the hybridization of genres has taken place, and I don't think there should be any problems with that. If we do not have any problems with that, and if genres are on the rise, they are increasing with every passing day, we cannot say that genre is in crisis. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Nair, for this enlightening takeoff. And he's saying that it is like enhancement of the genres. And if we are hybridizing it, there is no problem. Well, if there is no problem, we can say that there still can be, this is one aspect, but the other aspect is that, like you also said, that the genres, they are, some genres are fixed for certain things, taking poetry would be poetry, and prose would be prose. But this blending, or this amalgamation, or this crisis, whatever we call it, Dr. Usma, my second question would be to you, that which genres do you think are the beneficiaries, let's say, of this crisis, or whatever we can call it?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Rabia, and Dr. Nair, thank you for that really really informative and kind of visual explication of genres in fiction and perhaps other hybridized genres. So should I bend a lot, or maybe I can? Yeah. Okay. Am I audible? Yes. Thank you. So, problems of a short person, I guess. Okay, so before I begin talking about what I feel is the genre which is the most in crisis because of this this new or post-structuralist or post-structuralist trend in hybridizing categories and genres. I want to just, for the clarity of my own mind, I want to distinguish between two types of genres themselves. So the first type would be, as Dr. Nair explained, where art and technique is involved, and that is a more formalized, formalistic, structured genre of drama, poetry, and prose. So these are broad definitions of genre in literature, in literary productions. And so historically, if we historicize this a little bit and contextualize, historically I feel that the most popular genre before the advent of the modern age during and after the Renaissance was the drama form and the epic poetry. So this was the most popular form in the sense that it was a very artistic depiction and representation of mythology, folklore, and we have the example of Greek drama representation of social issues in drama. So it was much more structured and formalized. After the advent of modernity, the early modern period, Renaissance, and when Europe first started realizing that there's a possibility to break away from tradition, they obviously started experimentation. And then we see the coming of the novel during during the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay. Should I keep speaking?
Yes, you
I'm fine. I can just, yeah, I can just, yeah.
There were some things
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm fine with this. So, so the novel form in literature it's a product of the modern age itself. So it's a very modern and novel form of expression, human expression in literature. And with the 20th century, the technological changes that have been brought in society, the changes that society has gone through historically during the 20th century, and then we're witnessing in the 21st century, as you've just heard about microfiction, and how in the virtual world, the cyberspace, there is a lot of fiction available that is experimental, it's encompassed and encapsulated in so many innovative forms. So I feel that the genre that has benefited the most because of this crisis, so-called crisis, would be the prose fiction form, fiction. It has benefited because human beings, they love stories. And how you tell a story and how far you can experiment with storytelling, it just makes it more exciting and more thrilling. So in that sense, fiction has seen a lot of experimentation in form. And therefore, we have, and obviously this development has not gone unnoticed by the media industry. So that is why fiction is no longer just the premise or the territory of the publishing world or print media, but also cyberspace and cinema and television. They have taken on this responsibility as well as the pleasure of telling stories, because telling stories, it's a very powerful tool in someone's hand. And so this is the age, the postmodern age and the posthuman age basically is the age of new media technologies and how people experiment with that. So you have this development and variation, diversity within fiction itself. You have different genres. Now the genres in fiction are different from the genres of technique and form, as in prose, poetry, and drama. Genres in fiction have to do with who your readership is, or who your audience is, who your viewers are, depending on who's telling the story, right? So it's all about creating a niche market. And so, like, talking about adult fiction and chick lit, coming of age stories, they cater to a certain readership, which ultimately becomes a niche market for a publishing house or a media house. And so it's all about who's making money, and also the very powerful and it's actually giving power in the hands of someone that they are able to tell their stories. Because stories carry ideas or seeds of ideas, and it's very easy to plant these seeds in a reader's mind through telling a nice story, a good story. And so we have genres such as dystopian fiction. You have stories, fiction that caters to a fan base who love science fiction, or I think the vampire genre, the zombie genre. It all caters to some kind of, deep dark fantasy in our minds that we want an outlet for. So I feel that fiction has benefited the most, and it will continue to benefit because people will just keep telling stories. And I could go on about genre fiction because I'm also teaching this course. So you have genre fiction, which is about basically it's the concept is based on how bookstores categorize their books. So there are travelogues, there are mystery novels, detective fiction, science fiction, there's manga, comics, there's gothic fiction, there's cyberpunk, steampunk. All of these bookshelves are categorized for the ease of a prospective customer to just not waste time browsing and looking for books, but just to go directly to the genre allocated to one section in the bookstore and just go and buy the books. And so basically, I feel this is the fiction benefiting this way is also a part of how us as a society and people belonging to a society, how specialized our needs have become. We are so aware of what we want and desire, right? What kind of stories we want to read. Because it's all a part of our consumption patterns. We consume stories, we go to the cinema, we want to watch a certain type of film, we want a certain kind of book to read, because it provides us not just with escapism, but also, it makes us feel that, okay, we're well read. And plus, certain ideas that are subliminally carried and planted in our minds, and this is not like a conspiracy theory or anything, but I belong to the school of thought that does not disconnect ideology from the telling of stories. Stories, narratives, fiction, they are heavily ideology laden. They represent a certain ideology. The author might not necessarily be, on purpose, deliberately trying to disseminate certain ideas. And obviously, ideology doesn't mean political ideas only. It means ideas about our society, about ourselves, about our selfhood, about what we want to do with life, just life experiences that shape our lives. And then ultimately, fiction then stands to shape society at large. Because it normalizes certain things. Because everyone's thinking about it, everyone's reading about it, and at one point in time, these things that everyone is thinking about, they become a collective imaginary. They become part of a collective imagination. And it's not a coincidence that that famous book by Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities. He spoke about the importance of print media in shaping nations, or the conceptualization of nationalism. So it starts off very technically, the standardization of language, how language is standardized. Diversity in dialects, slight differences in accents, and differences that we all know are very human, and we feel that when we're talking to each other. They're standardized. So one language becomes the standard, and that standard language helps us imagine ourselves to be part of one community, one nation, right? Ultimately, one nation. So the entire this is just an example how an entire idea of a nation or a nation state is based on language, which was put into currency through print media, through the printing of newspapers and then novels, dissemination of ideas that are harmless, really. They're harmless as long as they are individually absorbed. But once they are collectively absorbed, these ideas become very powerful. So this, I would say, is the age where stories, fiction, they hold a lot of authority and power because of the new media technologies that we have at our disposal. And so that being said, the technology is at our disposal, but it's also created and deployed and used, instrumentalized by powerful people that are fewer in number than us. So we should be very careful as to what we're consuming. I would like to end.
Thank you, Usman, Dr. Inayat. I think by extension we can say as you said, the beneficiary is fiction and the telling of stories. And can we also say, and I think it can be also extended to that it is flash fiction. May that be in visuals, may that be in the reels that are being made, or something like that the society is consuming in that manner. All right. So, Dr. Arusa, thank you for being here. I'd like to ask you this question: that since Pakistani Anglophone literature has not aged much, is it still living with its generic essentialism, or do you think in some ways it is transitioning to genre equivocation?
Okay, thank you so much, NUML, the organizers, and Dr. Sabir for having me after so long. And I'm currently working on my 2 monographs, so my mind is absolutely somewhere else, but I'll try to respond to the question. To be very honest, Pakistani Anglophone literature to me has evolved tremendously over the last 2 decades. From realist fiction to historical metafiction, from life writing to graphic novels, drama, poetry, comics, and currently an amazing work is being done in a genre that we generally call speculative literature, which is an umbrella term for all the terms that we have come across, just now. We have utopian, dystopian fiction, we have apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic literature. Then we have science fiction, we have chick lit, we have gothic. You just name any genre, there's a lot that is being done currently by our wonderful writers. I think what is important to notice here is that our writers are weaving very interesting and intriguing tales in the futuristic world, albeit to discuss the issues related with contemporary life, to dealing with the problems and issues and shortcomings of our present-day realities. So there is one general perception probably among the readers of literature, especially when we talk about the popular genre or speculative genre, which are used simultaneously sometimes or synonymously, that probably the contemporary writers are dealing more with, and because speculative literature is an emerging genre in Pakistani literature, and it is, there is a boom, I think in the last 2 decades there is a boom of post-narrative literature or fiction, but now I think there is a boom of speculative genre, and you have so many authors starting from Osama Sadiq to Usman T. Malik, and then Sabine Javeri, and then we have Sadia Khatri, Salisha, Mohsen Hamid. There are so many writers. So whatever stories and tales they're creating in the futuristic world, they're not divorced from the realist issues. So unrealism is actually not divorced from realism. Now, what is genre basically? Genre cannot be envisaged or imagined as a mold which different works fit into. Basically, best writers, they take something from the traditional forms of the genres, and then they innovate, and then they leave their imprints in the new genre, and then they leave and open up more spaces for the writers to come, for the future generation, for the future readers, and for the future audiences. So first of all, we have to be very clear that yes, I don't think, again, coming to your point, the point that I'm trying to make is that I don't think that Pakistani Anglophone literature despite its very short history, is living in its life of essentialism. I think the ways in which they are growing, they're experimenting with the form, it's incredible. And this is also important because experiment in the genre is very important in actually challenging the essentialism. For example, essentialism in post-colonial studies, essentialism in gender studies. Look at the way, especially notice the social status of the religion in the post-9/11 times when people were reading and writing everything with a specific mindset. So it was extremely important to challenge that particular mindset. And in order to do so, our writers have actually then started experimenting with the forms. And then they were not simply experimenting with the forms, intriguingly, they were mix and matching the different genres as well. For example, if you say that people who are writing in utopian or dystopian genre, or the people who are writing comics, or people who are writing gothic, they're actually not sticking to that one particular genre. Intriguingly, they're even experimenting with the mix. There's this kind of intriguing mix and match of those genres as well. For example, Osama Siddique's fiction is a fine blend of realism and magic realism and fantasy or folklore. Similarly, Usman T. Malik's or Sami Shah's speculative fiction is a fine blend of myth, science fiction, and folklore. So what I'm trying to say is that most of the writers, they are experimenting with the genre for two reasons. On the one hand, of course, they need to situate their works within the global imaginary, which means that, of course, the West claims particularly that science fiction or speculative genre is their innovation, or probably that's coming from that part of the world, which is absolutely wrong, because if you go back to the history of speculative genre in Pakistan, you will see that people have been writing, the fantasy literature. We had, the stories of jinns and boots and Bichel Paris, that has been a part of our culture for so long. If you read the literature in Urdu, you read the literature in Punjabi, you read the literature in other local languages, you will come across all these stories. So what are these stories? These are the fantastic worlds. These are the worlds of fantasy that was being projected and presented by writers since decades. So we don't think that, that especially the writers of Pakistani Anglophone literature, they are absorbing and they are actually, they're actually inspired by our own literature. Okay, you can say that they are inspired by Pakistani literature tradition, they're inspired by South Asian, again by extension, and then, if you expand it a little bit more, you can say they're actually inspired by Persian and Islamic or Muslim literary traditions, because these have been the pet, issues in our culture. And the readers like, you and me, for example, because we grew up listening to these stories of jinns and Bichel Paris and, the fantasy world, so we don't even, it's I think easy for us to sort of even relate to those stories, to the worlds which they are creating. And then, they are opening up spaces for further experimentation. But, for example, if I just give you yet another example, that then, in the West, people are actually, they're actually now talking about robotics, they're talking about cyborgs, they're talking about artificial intelligence, and all that kind of stuff. Yes, in societies like Pakistan, because we are still kind of, to some extent, lagging behind, the world of artificial intelligence and that kind of stuff. But intriguingly, what is the purpose of creating this future world of the Pakistani Anglophone literature? Because they're even, for example, situating them within those artificial intelligence and the world of science and technology. And that is why I've just given you the example of Sami Shah. For example, if you read a story, there's a fine blend of, on the one hand we have, drone technology, on the other hand we have jinns. So what happens when the two interact? So super red naturalism is blended with the drone technology. The same is the case with, for example, for us, Talat's short story 7 to 4, if you've read it, it's a very small novella but an excellent work where a woman of Pakistani origin is shown to be a microbiologist, and she is shown to be the only savior of the white world. because she's almost 74, she will die, and that's kind of a very dystopian society where elderly people are expected to sort of, to die at the age of, youth. They prefer them to take euthanasia so that, the mandate could be given to the younger generation. And what is happening is that she's even expected to sort of carry on all the experiments on the prisoners, the white prisoners, which she actually refuses. So all of a sudden, a morality comes in conflict with scientific innovation. It comes in conflict with what is happening in the technologically advanced world. So intriguingly, what you will notice with reference to the Pakistani Anglophone writers who are actually writing speculative literature is that they're not shying away from going back to their Islamic traditions. If you just read the works, I think most of them, they are taking inspiration from Islam. They are taking inspiration, or they're taking the tropes and metaphors from Quran, and they are blending those very local tropes and motifs with the more advanced technological tropes that are being used in the first world. So there is a very fine blend, which what does it actually mean? Is that they really want to compete. For example, what we're doing is that that this kind of literature, particularly the experimental literature, is taking the Pakistani writers out of, they're lifting them from the margins and they're situating them at the center. So they're speaking from the center and not from the margins. And yet, they're in a position to foreground their own voice. Which means that, if you just read any literature, any experimental writing, you will notice one thing, that we are not borrowing from the West. We are not dependent on Western epistemology or Western, theoretical paradigms, but we are coming up with a more indigenous, paradigms. There is an allegation of stealing, but yes, it's so easy to sort of, rebut that as well, because currently, the writers, especially the critics who are exploring and writing on these issues, they are basically, they're not even relying on the Western academia or Western theorists. They are actually taking inspiration from their own Islamic, Muslim, South Asian, theoretical traditions as well. So, yes, my answer is that no, we are not living in that age of essentialism. Intriguing and interesting work have been created in order to, as I said, that, in order to challenge, particular mindset that had actually, began to overpower in the post 9/11 world. And most importantly, is very important to rebut and challenge the essentialism that actually prevails in other fields. And I can go on to talk more about it, I think in the next one.
I just wanted to ask a short question. Dr. Rusa, you have largely focused on Pakistani Anglophone fiction, be it speculative. Would you also like to comment on poetry in English in Pakistan and the kind of experimentation that is going on? Do you think that somebody is experimenting within the field of poetry, since drama has not grown up as such in Pakistan, and I think drama is the most neglected genre in Pakistan. Maybe only we have Usman Ali and somebody else also, and they are not quite recognized. So do you think that people are experimenting in terms of genre crossings in poetry especially, or is something happening in the domain of drama also?
Yes, it is. You're very right that, we don't see quite a lot that, or in the theatre world, for example, in Pakistan. And the reasons are quite obvious as well, because it requires, the dramas are meant to be performed and not written. And you can see the economic, factors that are involved in and we don't have a lot of theatres here. There are very few people who are actually working very seriously in terms of drama and theatre in Pakistan, but there is a lot that is happening in the West. I mean, if you look at some of the diasporic writers, Ayad Akhtar, and then there are a lot more as well, who have actually written and performed, staged the dramas in the West, particularly in America and the UK. But unfortunately, there has been a dearth of course, the rise of dramatic art in Pakistan because of, I think, the same reason, because of the lack of seriousness, and of course because of the lack of the economic resources as well. That has been one of the leading factors for the dearth of this particular genre in Pakistan. In poetry, yes, we do have people like, Shadab Zish Hashmi. Again, she's one of those very few writers, or Imtiaz Harper, of course, she's a Muslim writer, not Pakistani, but Indian. And Shamshad Khan. These are some of the writers who are experimenting with forms as well. For example, the ghazal, the idea of ghazal, the elements of the Urdu ghazal, they have been, for example, transformed, and they've been used by by Shadab Zish Hashmi in English, for example, as a collection. So we can't say that nothing is happening. There are few writers who are actually, trying to indigenize even the genre of poetry by taking inspiration from Persian or from the Islamic traditions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alisa, for this enlightening. So then that means that the boundaries are becoming more fluid, and we are blending in the boundaries. And however, I would remind ourselves of what Dr. Usma just said, that there is always an ideology, behind all the genres and the emerging of these different genres. So my question to you, Dr. Sibwat, would be that is there any temporal location for the fluidity of these boundaries? And this would relate to Usma's point also. I mean, how shall we establish a historical context for the said crisis or blending? When did this happen?
Thank you, Dr. Rabia. I think so much has been said on this, but okay, there is still some known. In the first place, I think these genres in the current condition, they sort of are shy of being historically located, or this historical or temporal situatedness, they are shy of that. But still, for our understanding, or for the understanding of our students, I think we need to have this quick, historical perspective of how that happened and when that happened. I'd also like to go back to Dr. Inayat's a very important point as to whether genres are in crisis or not. I think he has looked at this from a very interesting and important angle, that genres are probably not in crisis, they are just growing up. Since this title, Genres in Crisis, we had to come up with some title. So this is kind of open level playing field for everything to be said on this. So he's very right when he says we have also got to explore whether the genre is in crisis or not. So, and all of this is happening because of this thing, because we are trying to see if the genre is in crisis or not. So that is an important point that he has raised in the beginning. I think in order to situate this this so-called genre crisis or genre crossing or genre fluidity, we have to quickly look back at the Greek times and then come back. I would like to look at this in terms of 3 points. That is the establishment of genres, their formation, that started off with the Greek times, and then the ages that owned genres, and then this genre fluidity. So we can see, for example, that drama originated, we all know when we teach drama, we say drama originated in poetry contests in Dionysian festivals. So somehow drama and poetry had this symbiotic relationship right from the beginning. So we know that two genres, poetry and drama, were there when Sophocles was writing plays and Euripides and Aeschylus, when they were writing drama. In fact, they were engaging with both these genres, poetry and drama, because drama was written in poetry. So somehow this symbiosis between drama and poetry went on, and probably it is because of this thing what Dr. Uzma is referring to, that fiction was feeling jealous of this. So fiction started benefiting, becoming beneficiary of the crisis whenever the crisis happened. That is why now fiction dominates. So this is like on a lighter note. Then we see Aristotle defending poetry in the beginning of Poetics. So when he defends poetry after Plato's allegations, it means he is trying to delineate the contours of poetry. And then after defending poetry, he gives us details of how to write a tragedy and talks about the 6 constituent elements of tragedy, and in fact gives us a very formal kind of template of how to write drama. So this template was in place for like 4 centuries. We could not get rid of Aristotle unless maybe Arthur Miller wrote that essay, Tragedy and the Common Man. And he tried to show that even a common man like a salesman can become a hero of a tragedy. So we don't need Aristotelian specifications in order to write drama. And that is why we see that when we read Pinter and Beckett, and when we read Tom Stoppard, and when we read Brecht, we are not talking anymore of Aristotle's poetics or the way he wanted us to look at drama. That is why I would say that Aristotle, and when I say Aristotle, I want to say that it were the critics of literary genres who started playing gatekeepers of genres, and this gatekeeping role of genres went on from the Greek times down to the end of 19th century. Only then maybe there was a transitioning that happened. And then we have Philip Sidney. He once again defends poetry. So poetry at least is getting established as a genre. No one at least thinks as to whether poetry is a genre or not, because poetry is being established like that. Then, to authenticate it further, Dryden writes an essay on dramatic poesy. So he's favoring both drama and poetry. So the critics in fact, they were contouring the fixtures around genres in these times. When Johnson wrote Preface to Shakespeare, he was establishing Shakespeare as the first important dramatist, and that is why there was no question about whether drama was a proper genre or not. So it was there, it was established. So in this fashion, at least we already know that epic poetry, and Dr. Inayat has talked about it, Dr. Uzma has talked about it. So apart from those genres, we had poetry and drama in place in a very authentic fashion. And then on top of that, this is a kind of very naughty point, but I cannot resist it, that the genre formation or delineating the boundaries of genres, it was important for the agenda of the empire, because if they had not brought forth these proper identities or fixtures around their literary genres, it might not have served their idea of progress and reason and the Enlightenment that was helping British Empire out. So at least we can very conveniently say that the genres were established. Then we have age of drama. That is also called the age of Shakespeare. So who questions whether drama is a genre or not? Then we have the age of restoration comedy. So we know that restoration comedy is drama. Then we also call it the sentimental comedy. We also read Sheridan's The Rivals. And then we have Age of Milton. The Age of Milton because he wrote Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is a famous epic, and that is in blank verse. And then we have Age of Romantics, the romantic poetry. So poetry is further getting established. And mind it that these genres, if they were delineating these fixtures or these borders around genres, all this was serving the empire's agenda and the Enlightenment agenda. So when the world wars brought or spoiled the game for the Britishers, only then probably these chinks started developing in the strong armors of genres, and that is what we see from the 20th century on. I mean, things started going downhill in terms of this so-called crisis that started developing. So I would say the third stage, coming to your question, as to when did this thing happen? If we have to locate it, I would say this genre fluidity or genre crossings or this so-called crisis in genres, I think it started happening after 1960s in a formal way. For example, when that poetry collection, the Maximus poems, I think it was written because these poems were written in all kinds of genres, poetry, drama, prose, non-fiction, everything was in, I don't know what is, I'm blanking on the name of that, Maximus poems. And he also theorizes postmodern poetry also. And then, I should be referring to Linda Hutchins' essay, Theorizing the Postmodern. Since postmodernist elements started creeping along after 1960s, she formally mentions this thing that it was no more possible after the 1960s and probably especially in the 1970s to hide behind the self-contained boundaries of different disciplines, because disciplines and genres are flowing into each other. So she refers to Alice Munro's Alice Munro's short story collection, I think the Wives and Girls, or she also refers to Ondaatje's very important text that is Coming Through Slaughter. So Michael Ondaatje. So Coming Through Slaughter is both a long poem and a novel. Then you can see The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco, he experiments a lot. So he uses, 3 different registers: the literary and the historical, the theological, and the popular cultural register. So when these things are happening, then he refers to Death in the Canes, that documentary that experiments a lot with different genres. So this genre crossing or this genre fluidity, or you may call it, they also call it genre busting. So this started happening around 1960s onward and 1970s in the current sense of the word. But as Dr. Inayat has referred to different occasions, one should say, when this genre crisis was happening, you can check back at William Blake and many others when they were also trying to cross the boundaries of genres. So in that sense, we can say that if the genre crisis has happened somehow, it has happened because of the so-called priorities of late capitalism. Uzma was referring to the commodification of everything. So when everything is being commodified, and when empire's agenda is not around, and when no one is calling the shots in that sense, late capitalism may be very much there. So as long as it's late capitalism, this experimentation with genre boundaries is not going to end. Because it is more about commodifying genres and less about showing essentialism about them. So that is why I think late capitalism is to blame for this, especially. So I would stop here.
Your answer actually makes us think, or we should think about not just late capitalism, but also about whether really the empire is no more there, or what has replaced the empire, and hence the commodification and all, right? So now we are moving towards our second round, and much to our not liking this thing, but we have to restrict ourselves in the answers, in the sense that we have to finish it by 11, and then we are going to have a question and answer session. So I would like my panelists, although we would like to listen to you for a longer time. So in our second round, I'm going to talk about, we have understood and we have kind of established that genres, they are in fluidity, right? So,
Dr. Ravi, if you want to welcome Dr. Safir, he is in.
Okay. Welcome, Dr. Safir, to your own home. So we're going to inshallah wait at the end. Now in the second round, I'm going to start my question again with Dr. Inayat, and I'm going to just ask this question because of a large premium put on interdisciplinarity these days. We know about this, like genre crossing or interdisciplinarity. To what effect is the erasure of boundaries happening between the literary and the non-literary genres? I think we've all addressed it, but I would like to just speak about that.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia. I'll take you from what Dr. Uzma was saying and the other panelists, that all these genres that they exist, they have a specific order of consumption. There is that community of people who consume these genres, be it coming of age genre, or be it horror or mystery, or science fiction. So when we talk about interdisciplinarity, we usually use this term more in terms of carrying out research in literary text, on literary text or literary studies. But if you're saying that where do genres overlap when they make a connection between literary world and non-literary world, as I give you an example in the first round as well, that docufiction is one of them, where they bring into play fiction while making documentaries. When making documentaries, there are those segments which they cannot find their hands on actually happening in the real world, so they dramatize it to make to make an impact on in the documentary. Secondly is ethnofiction. That's also carried out. That's also an amalgamation of literary fiction and non-fictional world. On the first note that I mentioned, that if you're talking about carrying out research in that, after liberal humanism, because we mentioned liberal humanism, we talked about them as theory after theory before theory. The works which were literary criticism that was carried out before the advent of these advocacy movements that we have right now. For example, the works of Matthew Arnold, Coleridge, Sir Philip Sidney, and all these people. So once we enter into the age that is no more considered as the age of liberal humanism, the humanity gets divided into quarters. So whoever is writing, he is writing with an impact that he or she is getting from the society. There are ideologies at play, as Dr. Rosma was saying. Nobody can write in the air, nobody can write in a vacuum. So when that is there, the writer is being impacted by the surroundings. And when it goes to the reader also, when interpreting it, is getting impacted by that. And again, if we are talking about research, we bring into play when we carry out research in literary studies. We bring into play fields which are beyond literary studies. For example, we borrow from anthropology, we borrow from history, and to a great extent from psychology, from gender studies. When we talk about feminism and LGBTQ+, we enter into gender studies plus as an umbrella term, of course. And history when we talk about new historicism. So with the passage of time, as I mentioned in the last round as well, the fluidity or the hybridity or the hybridity of these genres has taken place. And as Dr. Silva mentioned, genre busting has taken place. This is a term that is used, that genres are being challenged. And how does this happen? All this happens when you go beyond the essentialist definition of a genre and you experiment with that. When you experiment with that and you then throw it out to the virtual space or to the people in any medium, be it in the form of publication, in black and white, or through the cyberspace. So if it clicks and if it has got readership, you have made another genre. And if there are other people joining in, of course, when you go against a certain genre or you play with it, you take liberty with that, there is an opposition that comes because change is usually resisted. But this is how then it takes place. Another example that I would give you with docu-fiction and ethno-fiction is that of graphic novel. Graphic novel is also it's been used, and I would like to take the example of Art Spiegelman when he wrote Mouse and In the Shadow of No Towers, that exclusively deals with the Nazi Holocaust, and this in the Shadow of No Towers deals with the destruction that was caused by 9/11. So what happens in graphic novel is that, and again, graphic novel, we feel that graphic novel is something that came forth as one of the genres in 21st century or late 20th century. That is not the case. When I gave the example of William Black's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, that was written in 1780, that was a combination of poetry, prose, plus there were engravings on the lines of the kind of strips that we find in, or the comics that we find in this graphic novel. So even in 1780s, they were blurring the boundaries of these, and comics were there in that age as well. Now we have them in graphic novel and doodle fiction, as I mentioned earlier. So it's going on. It's an ongoing process. No more strict boundaries for genres, and this suggests that genre is developing. Genres are developing. New genres are coming. Whenever we read about genres, we always read that this is something. New genres come with the passage of time. If we start counting them, as I mentioned earlier as well, there is this book 30-second literature. They mention as many as 24 genres which are in vogue. And if we start counting them now, they're even beyond that, and they are increasing. So yeah, I mean, once the boundaries are blurred, people then cross over to other fields and other domains and new genres, and they experiment with the form, and new genres come into existence, which I believe, of course, is really hard to see. Unlike calling it, I believe we should be calling it genre in crisis. Genre is enriching, the new genres are coming, and that's really good, because from every segment of society, people write for a particular segment of society, and instead of judging it on the yardstick of one particular genre, it's good to give it another name, and that perhaps will go on with the passage of time. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Dr. Enai. So in this fast emerging emerging and fast, paced world that we are living right now, it is imperative that these genres, they're going to develop or emerge into something new all the time. Perhaps we might not be able to catch up with them with the passage of time. My question to you, Dr. Usma, is that in this time of emergency, we can say, it would be remiss of me if I don't engage with the virtual and the celluloid, right? So something, or cellular lacuan, as my students would know. We witness a lot of genre crossings in the celluloid and or the virtual world. So how would you expand on this, please?
So, yeah, I would give a more like a cultural studies perspective of this, and so genre, like in my previous explication, I explained was I spoke about fiction and print media. And the printing press, the printed word, right? So now the transformation or the transference of fictional narratives to celluloid. So I see over here, I think the emphasis should be given to the materiality of the medium that is being used to disseminate certain stories and narratives. So you have I think that the novel will never, the paperback will never really go out of fashion, out of fad, because there is something so special about owning a book and reading it, keeping it with you. So there's something so intimate about that. But the importance and the political importance, as well as the power of the medium of celluloid, it cannot be denied. Because celluloid and this the materiality of celluloid is something that also interests me, because I cannot help but think about Walter Benjamin's essay on art in the age of mechanical reproducibility. And celluloid, for me, that is the perfect embodiment of reproducibility through moving images. So Benjamin did talk about, he wrote about the photograph, the camera, and he wrote about it in connection with the aura of the artistic object. So an artistic work carries a certain aura around it. That aura is defined as the distance of awe between the beholder and the thing, the object in front of the viewer. So in this age of mechanical reproducibility, we have lost that aura pretty much. And so I think the question we should be addressing is, to what extent can celluloid carry these stories that we so crave? And the fact of the matter is that genre, and I'm over here talking about genre fiction, different genres of stories that we are all discussing here. They are also carriers of a moral code that each of us understand. And in celluloid, what happens is that two things happen. First of all, the dissemination and reinforcement of a certain moral code. Societal structures are reinforced, or they are just, and also embedded with perhaps new ideas depending on the political economy behind the production process of the film, of the narrative, right? And then also, being, the silver screen or television, that helps in the democratization of this moral code and ethics, and then other societal and cultural values, right? So democratization is a good thing, yes. we all are, there's unity, the building of community, the importance of voicing the common man's problems, issues, because at the bottom of the pyramid of the societal structure, that's the heaviest, and the broad base of the common man and their problems. It's so important to talk about them, to tell each other stories, and all that experience is so important. But nevertheless, the medium of the celluloid itself, for me, translates into another, postmodernist thinkers' evaluation and critique of this age, Guy Debord's society of the spectacle. So the spectacle is so important, and the spectacle, by definition, is very, very superfluous. It's shallow, it has no depth. So in celluloid, we have 2 or 3 kinds of stories, and then you're also familiar with film studies. I'm not as such, I don't know the in-depth technicalities of film studies or film theory, but definitely, art films, you have films that are produced for the sake of art, and they tell a story. So for instance, Iranian cinema, there's, they have big names like Mahmoud Baf and Kiarostami, and there's another one who won recently at the Oscars as well. So their production process, it's very artistic, and it does incorporate what Dr. Naik was talking about, the docu-fiction, right? Incorporating the documentary with the fictional form, and even in that process, they are telling stories and they are indigenizing. So that, as an art form, has, so the medium has some depth in terms of the narrative has depth, it's 3-dimensional, multi-dimensional. But then you have the more popular version of films, Hollywood blockbusters, Bollywood blockbusters, and that is consumed the most by the people. So that means or spells out democratization the most for us. And so that's quiche. So quiche then becomes, and celluloid becomes a means of democratizing stories and narratives. And again, this is a really powerful tool, I would say. And considering the fact that we are projecting and kind of putting down the burden of our moral codes on celluloid that needs thinking. Because for me, that's what fiction is. It's all about storytelling, telling each other stories, and all discourse, even if it's scientific, even it's a realist, it's realism, it's naturalism, it's philosophy, all of this, they're stories, basically. They're stories. So yeah, I just see celluloid as a medium. Yes.
Thank you, Usma. Certainly these docudramas, this is something which we can, in the celluloid world, we can see a lot more happening and coming into shape, more so. So my next question is to you, Dr. Rusa, and coming back to this genre overlapping and imbricating each other can be seen in a process of hybridization, as you also mentioned, right? And this hybridization implicates identity, right? So coming back to our basic question, whether it is in crisis or not, but it does implicate identity, and by extension we can say, can this genre fluidity be viewed or termed as queering genres?
Right. Recently I moderated a session on Argentine literature and Pakistani speculation at a poetry festival. And when we were discussing the title, we were trying to come up with a term that would cater to both the literary traditions of the regions, like Argentinian literature and Pakistani literature. And we thought about using the term speculation, which we preferred, from our perspective, but most of the panelists, they wanted to use the term for Argentine literature, the literature of the unusual. And it is mainly because most of the Argentinian writers are experimenting with the genre to the extent that they were mixing up, the comics with Gothic, or the Gothic comic and the science fiction. So, to cut short, there wasn't something, there didn't exist anything which we could call soft and hard form of the genre. You can't say, okay, this is a hard science fiction. And they used a very interesting term for this kind of literature. Hard-boiled. There's no hard-boiled. There's nothing like hard-boiled science fiction or whatever. So, well, in fact, the crime fiction was kind of, blended with the science fiction or even the Gothic. So this is interesting. So they came up with a term, and that was called literature of the weird, which I find very intriguing and which kind of, refers to what you're talking about right now in terms of queering genres. Right? You just see the term queering genre. What is queer genre? Queer genre, the purpose of queer genre is to kind of destabilize the very typical expectation of the audience about, let's say, gender, or about subverting the subject positions. Now, from that perspective, it means that the non-conventional forms are not confined or not forced to replicate or reproduce what the traditional forms have been doing, which means that, experimenting with the form of with the genres or blurring the boundaries of the genre actually opens up spaces for negotiation. It opens the spaces for decolonization. It opens the spaces for transgression, right? Again, like, for example, if I say that Daniel Mohyuddin's short stories or Angela Carter's short stories, which are basically informed by the traditional fairy tale stories, which we used to consider very innocent, and coming back to the point that every literature is informed by certain kind of ideology, what happens is that the hypersexual female characters in both these writers' stories, they're meant to transgress the boundaries. They're meant to challenge the patriarchal or more conservative societies. But intriguingly, those hypersexual women characters were using their sexuality to subvert the power equation in a society, because that's the only thing. They're uneducated. The economic situation doesn't allow them to, for example, compete or to subvert the power structure in any other way. They're uneducated, they don't have financial resources, they don't have good jobs at hand, so they're going to use their sexuality, which is the only thing, which is the only powerful thing that they have. But does this position them in the category of good woman and the bad woman? And the answer is no. I mean, I'm not saying that Daniel Mohyuddin or even Angela Carter is kind of, approving this kind of hypersexuality of the woman to use it as a means to overpower men. Yet, they are the men, they are the women who are the makers of their own choice. I mean, we can't put them in any binary. So the purpose is simply to break the binary and to empower them in certain possible ways. And yes, for example, in Daniel Mohyuddin's stories, none of the women, for example, succeed at the end. But at least, they're in a position to take the credit of their success, and they're equally taking the credit of their failure. They're easy. So, what I'm trying to say is that the blurring the boundaries has actually, what you can call queering the boundaries, has actually helped them to transgress, to shackle the barriers in the society, and it has opened up the spaces for negotiation for most of the people. There is another very important thing, I think, that this blurring the boundaries has helped the writers to engage with the issues both at the local and the global level. They're very much interested in exploring the problems associated with their own society, but at the same time, they're competing with the West as well. They're competing with the global marketplace as well. So, for example, many writers are engaging within issues related to LGBT. They're engaging within issues related to human rights debates. So, again, because it's very interdisciplinary, but that is helping, or for example, they're engaging within issues related to artificial intelligence. So yes, this querying of the genre has actually opened up the spaces for other fields, for intersections with other fields as well. And this is precisely how we can actually, talk about the issues at the larger scale. So for me, genre or, these experimental writings, they are the spaces of, they are a source of dynamism and creativity, where writers are open to experiment with them. I mean, if you just ask any creative writer, and you just ask them that, have you thought about any particular genre? Have you talked about, for example, have you thought about writing in a particular form? They would find the question absolutely ridiculous. I think it's for us critics and academics to talk about these things, but they don't think about these, And that is why, we see this blending of, the boundaries. But at the same time, as I again and again say that our own writers are very much aware of, they're very much conscious about their own roots, they're very much conscious about the strengths of their own forms and genres, and they do take inspiration from them. I mean, I have been recently, for example, working on the idea of Islamic feminism and the feminism in the speculative genre. So I was reading Bina Shah's work, I was reading Satya Khatri's story, I was reading Shahzad Fatma Heather's Afaka and the Dept, for example. And in all the works, I, instead of relying more on, first of all, feminism, because there's a lot of, it's very different from our issues, from our problems. So I probably preferred to use Amina Wadud, for example, because I situated and I was discussing the idea of Khalifa, and it just subverted the entire definition of Khalifa in one of the texts that, that how the entire responsibility, or because they're considered to be the takers, and they're considered to be the caretakers of the families. So that has been juxtaposed with the speculative genre, and I think this is only the imaginative, futuristic worlds, the worlds where the writers open up the possibility to talk about the things which generally would not have been possible, probably, in a realist fiction. So, in many ways, I think this blurring of boundaries, or boundary busting, or querying genres, or querying boundaries, whatever you want to call them, it has actually opened up spaces of negotiation for the most recent writers. But I mean, they're situating the stories are set in the futuristic world, but as I said, that the problems that they are dealing with, they're very much related to contemporary issues and problems.
Thank you, Dr. Arisa. And I think we are all familiar with this term interspecies. And these interstitial spaces can be very productive, actually, in terms of our, production of literature or whatever. So now we come to the close, and it is going to be our capping question, and I'm going to address it to Dr. Sibwood. And I would like to ask you, what is the big deal if the genre boundaries are permeable and porous these days? Are we not settling down for this newness? Or are we living in the wrong times? Can we say that? Or does the fluidity of genres in literature mean the end of literature as we know it?
Yeah, this is a good question to come at the end. In the first place, I would say there's no big deal. Yeah, if these things are happening, if literature is evolving, the concept of literature is evolving, so we don't want to stay back in the 16th century. We want to move on. So I don't think that it's a big issue that there is this genre fluidity or genre crossings. Instead of getting embarrassed, or instead of getting stubborn over the old-time traditional concept of literature, I think we need to move on, and we need to embrace this sense of newness. We have to settle down with this. We know there was a time when, for example, autobiography was called a bastard genre, and they were not willing to accept this genre, this kind of writing as a genre. But now, not only have they accepted this bastard genre as as a very strong way of writing, expressing yourself. In fact, now they call them life narrative studies, life writings, and everybody is jumping on this autobiography bandwagon. So there was a time back in the 18th century, for example. First of all, it was mentioned in the 18th century. So if I had to, if I should borrow this word bastardization from around this concept of autobiography initially, I'd say that we have to settle down, and we are settling down with this bastardization of genres. I mean, this is another term. People shouldn't take it religiously. This is just another name. And what was the next question? There was 3 questions. Yeah. Of course, how can we say that we are living in the wrong times? We are born at the right time, and we are living in the right times because these are our times, and we have to celebrate these times. So, in fact, this genres in crisis, going back to Dr. Inayat's idea. To see if genres are in crisis. In fact, it is a celebration of this crossing, genre crossing. That is what we are doing here. So we are not living in the wrong times. We are living in the right times, and that is how literature should, come to us, and we have to put it on, and we have to celebrate this. In fact, there are certain issues that might be happening somewhere upstairs that maybe. When F.R. Lewis was writing The Great Tradition back in 1948, he was mentioning 4 or 5 novelists from England and 4 or 5 from America. I mean, like Jane Austen, our good Jane Austen, and Joseph Conrad and Henry James. He wanted to order the British canon in order and excellence. I mean, he was trying to come up with the idea of excellence around the writings of those writers. And then he included Edgar Allan Poe, Herman Melville, and Nathaniel Hawthorne from America also, and he tried to define the Western canon. So probably we have moved on from that stipulation of the canon, and the issue that I want to refer to is that probably if somebody wants to be the gatekeeper of the literary writings or the creative writings or critical writings, they would be ill at ease reforming the canon in the present world, reforming the literary canon in the present world. That is why I say that if we should, I think we should place the first phase of this genre formation as foundationalism, the second phase as anti-foundationalism, and the times that we are living in, these are re-foundationalism times. So we are readjusting ourselves, readjusting our kind of literature or our kind of understanding of literature, and that is why we are settling down with this uneasiness. So this is our kind of uneasiness, and we have to live with this. If somebody is writing flash fiction, if somebody is writing docu-fiction, if somebody is writing postage stamp fiction, whatever it is, these are the forms of literary writings that belong to our times. So we have to live with them. So I don't think that we are in the wrong times, and literature has not come to an end. In fact, literature is growing up, and we would move on with whatever form of literature we have got. So we know, as it was discussed by Dr. Uzma, that certain genres have established a kind of hegemony over other genres, like fiction being the most popular. Dr. Arusa has referred to the fiction also. So fiction is raging everywhere. The Booker Prize and the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize mostly goes to fiction writers. Poetry people and those who write drama, they only occasionally get these prizes. So we may be living with this feeling that there are certain hegemonic genres and there are certain scapegoated genres. So we have to live with this. And inshallah, I think these are our times and we have to put up with this.
Rami has said that we need to just come out of that guilt that we are producing literature as a form of retaliation. We are writing literature in third person. He said that just emerge from that third person perspective, come out of that guilt of colonialism and whatever, or new imperialism, whatever, and start writing in a first person perspective. And I think this is precisely what this blending of the genres, or blurring of the boundaries of the genre has given to the writers. They've given it space to come up, emerge from that guilt, and start speaking in the first person perspective.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it audible? Okay. So when Dr. Silver, then you were talking about this thing, like Ian Watt, when he is writing in 1954, The Rise of the Novel, the book that he wrote, and in there also he talks about the novel has the ability to grasp everything and to engulf everything. So literature is like that in our times, we can say that. All right. So any final sentence? Since both of them have spoken, I would ask you, Dr. Isma and Dr. Inayat, just half a minute, comment on your comment.
I've been caught off guard. I think, like fiction for me is one sentence. Okay, that's just more pressure. One sentence. I was thinking that fiction is the epic of this age.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Whatever form it is.
And film is the drama, theater of this.
Yes.
Alright, just one sentence, and I'll leave it to the audience as a food for thought. That is, when I was coming to this discussion, for this session, I don't know, all of a sudden Russian formalists came to my mind who were concerned with the form only and not with the meaning. So I leave it to you. Yeah.
That might not be that relevant because everything has a meaning, has an ideology these days. I don't know, this is just a quick thought. And I would like now to invite questions from the audience. So, she spoke, that's why I engaged her. Please.
My one sentence is that we are living in fact I would use my favorite word, we are living in the times of carnivalesque of genres, and a cacophony of forms. So cacophony of voices.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. Okay, so we'll start with our first question from the audience. You may raise your hands and then speak in the mic, but introduce yourself first, please. Yes, please.
Am I audible? Yes, ma'am. Of course. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nandlal and I am from Bridging, English Bridging. My question is from particularly. So, from the person who talked about, sorry, I don't know the names, and so my question is from the person who taught on fiction, and repeatedly she said that every fiction carries ideology, and ideology is always there in what kind of literature that is being produced. So my simple question is, what about those who think that there should be a literature for the sake of literature? How will you see Amjad Islam Amjad or Munir Niazi Saab and the others if you see that ideology is there in literature? So this is a simple question from whosoever wants to.
I'm that person. The person speaks. Yeah, I do understand that concern, reading fiction or appreciating art just for the sake of it being there, right? But there are different schools of thought, and unfortunately for some people, I belong to the school of thought that I think there is no apolitical artist or author. And by political, I don't mean in the sense of like conventional politics, but there is an ideology at work, because we all, we are nodes where different, various and diverse ideologies, they cross. And therefore, you have your way of thinking, you have your paradigm, you have a certain perspective on life. And that is your ideology. So because we always position ourselves in terms of opposition to the other, and that itself is, you're situating yourself in an ideology. So just that, me being different from you, or me considering that I am different from you in some way, that is, ideology. It's a political stance. So yeah, this is how I read literature.
And just to add one thing, that nothing is innocent nowadays. The children's cartoons are not innocent, video games are not innocent. So you just can't take them, with faith.
I will take the liberty of addressing and bridging your question with what Dr. Usma and Dr. Arusa has just said. You talked about Amjad Islam Amjad. Some years back, I went to his home I was researching about his drama. आप लोगों में से तो किसी ने भी नहीं देखा होगा वो Waris, and one of the characters of Waris of Hashmat Khan of Waris. And I was doing a comparative analysis with one of the characters of David, what's his name? Charles Dickens. No. So when I talked about it and he explained the things, I could see that he had written with an ideology behind it. He wanted to shackle those, the ideologies of that aristocratic society and the aristocratic mentality of the society of those times. Or you talk about Munir Niazi, you talk about Faz, they all wrote with an ideology behind it,
Yeah,
and that ideology needs not always be taken in the negative connotation, right? So
I would just like to add that in the modern age, I think the Marxist ideology has produced a lot of artistic works. So most of our artists and authors have been inspired by the works of Karl Marx, and then just that as a theoretical paradigm has influenced them in so many ways. So art now again, it's not that innocent in the sense that it serves a purpose of political activism, and just dissemination of ideas.
So, any other question? Sorry, any other question?
I'm Mohammed Tayyar from BS English HC Morning. I've got a couple of questions from Dr. Arusa and one question from Dr. Usma. My first question is this, that you mentioned about Jim Boots and then you compared it to the recent sci-fi fiction. When we look at the writers like Dan Brown, Dean Koontz and Stieg Larsson and all of them just inculcating sci-fi into their fiction, can you give us a particular example from our writers who can be called the pioneers of sci-fi in our Urdu literature? And the second question, you said that they have got a lot of influence from Persian poetry. So are there the classics of Saadi and Shirazi, or the contemporary like Shahryar Tabrizi or Furugat Farrukhzad or Ahmad Shamlu or Faridun? Whose influence they have more in their work when it comes to Persian? And one question about you talked about film-e-Irani or Persian cinema. So you talked about two names. I haven't heard them, so if you repeat them, I would be very delighted to hear them. And the Persian cinema is highly acclaimed. If you talk about Shahab Muzaffari, or you talk about Mahtab Karamati or Elnaz Shekeldu, so their works like Ozan Nagashi, The Painting Pool. So how can we say that this is a kind of a crisis, or can we say that their work is not being acclaimed in all places because people are more indulgent to Bollywood and Hollywood work? And one last thing, because it's such an amazing thing that I've got zillions of questions. I'm sorry, I've got zillions of questions. Is it a crisis in genres, or genres in crisis? Because are people mostly reading literature? The literature starts at Khalid Hosseini and then ends at Elif Shafak. So they're not going for that Scandinavian. Being a student of literature, I would say the Scandinavian literature, Russian classics, they're just amazing.
Question का मैं जवाब दूँ.
Absolutely, thank you so much, sir. I would be great.
I think it is both ways. Crisis in genres and genres in crisis both ways. So we need to stay open to this thing. The genres are also kind of jittery over losing their previous status. And when genres look at other genres, they feel there is crisis. So genres in crisis and there is crisis in genres. It is both ways.
So many questions.
He was talking about speculative fiction, and you were talking about the magical realism and also the.
Okay. There was one question that you talked about. I was actually talking about the contemporary. Yeah, the first question related to that if there is any sci-fi, pure sci-fi in Urdu. Well, no, unfortunately, because this has been part of my project, Muslim Women Popular Genre, and I was specifically focusing on the pure sci-fi, like hard sci-fi. Genre in indigenous languages. Well, that to some, yeah, it's not. But no, we don't find pure sci-fi in our local or our indigenous literature, unfortunately. And that is why I had to shift my focus towards a critical anthology, because I was thinking of compiling an anthology with translations of the pure sci-fi that are to be found in indigenous languages, Saraiki, Pashto, and Urdu. So no, I'm afraid we don't have many. Currently, some of the writers are writing, they're experimenting with the form, but they're all male writers. Intriguingly, it's kind of a very, you see that, it's very gendered space that's been created even by the male writers. Then you talked about the Persian. Yes, for example, Shadab Zish Hashmi, she's the one, who's actually taking inspiration from the ghazal forms, and she's also taking inspiration from the Persian traditions. Amir Hussain is also sort of, for example, he takes a lot of inspiration from the Persian. And spiritualism, for example, from the spiritual or the Sufi literature, that was something, a kind of source of inspiration for Usman Malik and for Sadiq Khatri, all these writers. So a lot of these writers who write speculative literature, they're actually taking inspiration from their own localized, very much Islamic, mystic and Sufi traditions. What was the next question? Sorry. That was, okay, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you were asking me what names I named of the Iranian film directors and producers. So Abbas Kiarostami and Mahmoud Mahmoudbaf. Mahmoudbaf was, I think, from the 70s, 60s and 70s. He was most kind of, he was one of the pioneers of that artistic genre in Iranian cinema. And Abbas Kiarostami, he died recently, I think it's been a few years, but he's a bit more contemporaneous. He does have a really large oeuvre of films that he has directed, and I named these people as a reference of art film, alternative cinema that is not mainstream, it's not as democratized as such. Kiarostami, I personally really love his films because he doesn't really actually translate fiction into the film form, the filmic form, but he just experiments with film itself, with camera work, with documentary filmmaking style, and folkloric incorporation into his narratives. And mostly, you know, he has a signature style. His films mostly feature people traveling in cars, and whatever happens inside the interiority of the car and the outside, I think that's really beautiful. So in that sense, as an artistic expression, film as an artistic expression.
Thank you.
We can have only one last question from the audience. So, yes.
Thank you, professors, for such an enlightening talk. I just wanted to continue the question of my fellow, for Ma'am Usma, that when she talked about that we cannot separate ideology from stories, and when we look at the current writers, for example, Sally Rooney, who takes inspiration from Marxism, why is there still criticism on writers like Sally Rooney or, for example, Khalid Hosseini or Mohsin Hamid or Fatma Bhutto, when they are incorporating culture or, for example, some Asian roots with ideologies from before? Should there, we talked a lot about de-alienating genres and their boundaries. Should there be some caging of genres too? Because in postmodern world, in post-structural world, if we see every person has access to art, and art should be liberated, but also it creates confusion for us as readers, as if a writer writes, for example, if Sally Rooney writes on Marxism and she romanticizes mental illness in women, many women like me will take inspiration from her writings. So should there be some caging of genres in that sense, that every writer should not be allowed to, I don't know, express their ideologies as freely as they should, because they are encouraging young minds and younger generation when it comes to ideologies?
So I will begin with your last comment. I think it's more of a comment because so you're saying you take inspiration from that fiction, yet you're asking why it should not be caged into a genre. So that's exactly why it shouldn't be, because I think it stems the creative process, the fountain of creativity, right? It needs to be given a lot of freedom. I think the collapsing of boundaries between genres, this is not a deliberate process. This is much more organic than we think. It just happens so because the process of creativity, it takes certain directions which are very holistic and organic depending on the artists and the authors producing that work. So you can't really stop, put a you know, like a barricade that process. I don't think that's very healthy for society to grow, because you know, we're all humans, we're organic beings, we grow, and although I'm more of an anti progressivist person in terms of my you know, decoloniality and that kind of questioning the whole linear progression of history and the evolution of society. I do question that, but that doesn't mean one doesn't recognize the growth, the organic growth of something that is coming from very, very human experiences. So I think that's why genres cannot really be reified or made into these rigid structures. And I think your question was about why it is why is it so what's wrong with ideology? So I think they're not really being criticized as much because they represent the global left in so many ways, in so many bifurcations and branches of the global left that has emerged. I haven't read these novelists except for Fatma Bhutto's one novel, which I read, and I found Fatma Bhutto to be very, you know, she's very transnational in her outlook. She's very global. She's a global citizen, And then also she has a history, given her background of, that Marxist history, her father being the founder of a communist party in Pakistan. So yeah, that's understandable. Her father as well was, he formed that, Mumtaz Ali Bhutto formed that communist group that hijacked the plane. Yeah, so that hijacked the plane in Kabul. Yeah, Al-Zulfikar Tanzim. And they were very kind of, these political activists. But, so yeah, I think that's fine. That's fine. She's a Marxist and, or that leftist tendency is there. But just as a footnote, I would like to say that I have a more, I'm all for decoloniality and decolonizing epistemology, and I see the left as an outcome and as an outgrowth of Enlightenment philosophy, political philosophy. So for me, I would not agree with her, but we all agree to disagree.
Whatever you just said, this requires another sitting, and another talk, because this is taking to another. So thank you so much, Dr. Inayat, Dr. Usma, Dr. Arusa, and Dr. Sifat for being here and for this enlightening talk, quote unquote. And I would like to give the mic over to the host, please.
Thank you, ma'am. It was indeed a very interesting and informative session for all of us. And I would like to thank our honorable panelists and moderator for such an engaging and insightful discussion. Please give them a huge round of applause. A special thanks to our Honorable Dean Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Aban, for gracing this event with his presence. Thank you, sir. Now, it's time for us to appreciate a worthy panelist and moderator for the participation and precious contribution to this auspicious event. I request Honorable Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Aman, Dean Faculty of Arts and Humanities, to please come on stage to distribute shields and certificates among the panelists and moderators.
I would like to say a few words. Thank you very much for inviting. First of all, while you are in the company of such, literati, with a little bit of hint of glitterati also, it's very hard to add anything to the knowledge that you have already got from them. Just one advice: what to do with that knowledge. That is, very important nowadays. When I sit with other deans in, meetings upstairs, they are always floating in an air of self-importance, because they think that they are dealing with more important subjects that have more social, technological relevance to Pakistan and to the world. And there sometimes I feel, a little cornered when I am announced as Dean Faculty of Arts and Humanities. My advice to these bright faces, and after listening to your questions, actually I was very much encouraged. There is a lot of hope for us in our future from this generation. So my advice is that think about how to make this knowledge that you get every now and then from different forums, how to make that knowledge socially relevant. And also, particularly nowadays, the question which is increasingly and emphatically asked is how to make social sciences and humanities in particular economically relevant also. Even in a meeting yesterday, somebody, an important body in fact, mentioned that we need to increase the number of students in IT, and we should decrease the number of departments of social sciences in this university. And this is the thinking of all education managers, I think almost everywhere in the world now, the kind of economic crunches that we face throughout the world. So this is a legitimate concern, and we who consider ourselves as the gatekeepers, you can say, are responsible humans for the human culture in this world. We also need to come out of our boundaries and come down to earth, because we have been living too long in the world of the nightingales and the skylarks. It's time to be very down to earth and make ourselves socially and economically relevant. My advice to the departments, both the departments, is this: that since we talk a lot, and when you talk and when you listen to such very kind of enlightening and entertaining talk, then this entertainment, this lazzat that we derive from the flavor of that talk, that lasts like all flavors in our mouth or in our minds, but only for some time. ये मसला है, जितनी भी लज्जतें होती हैं उनके साथ उनकी ड्यूरेशन जो है बड़ी कम होती है. So how to make or how to create something material out of that enjoyment that we derive from such talks? Think about that. And the advice that I was going to extend to the departments is that they must now hold workshops about how to not only talk about stories, but also how to make stories, and how to turn those stories into visual art forms and upload them on the social media, and we ourselves should become, our students should become the story makers instead of all the time following the other story makers in the social media spaces. So please think about this, and you may coordinate and collaborate with the Media Studies department. You can also yourself learn how to run a camera and how to tell a story, whether it's written by yourself or somebody else, some very, very short story, and dramatize it and give it a visual effect, and that will maybe earn you some money also. Nowadays it's very easy to earn money through such means. Also, I was intrigued by this woman who comes nowadays on YouTube. She has been creating e-books, very short e-books, from the existing materials, and her own contribution is not much, but addressing different needs of people. For example, psychological needs of people, or the cultural knowledge that people want to get, or the medical needs of people. Small e-books are created by them, and they are earning money also. So how can we, the students and the teachers, the faculty of arts and humanities, can also contribute economically in the economy of our country, and by that we can also improve our personal finances. So I'm very sorry to mention this after this high-powered talk about so many good grand ideologies and Marxism, and the mentioning of so many posting of the posts. Sorry to mention economy also, but as Dean perhaps, and as the eldest, maybe in terms of age also in the department, it's my responsibility to alert you to some painful facts of our life. Thank you very much.
so much, sir, for such an enlightening talk. Now it's time for the distribution of shields and certificates. Firstly, I would like to invite Dr. Arusa Kaval, Chairperson, Department of English, International Islamic University, to collect her shield and certificate. Thank you, ma'am, for gracing this event with your presence. Now please give a big round of applause for Dr. Sibghatullah Khan. We are immensely thankful for his presence today and for his intellectual insights in the planning of this event. Next we have Dr. Inayatullah, Head of Department, English Graduate Studies. Please give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable time and presence. Please put your hands together for Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari for a very enlightening discussion. Thank you, ma'am. Last but not least, we have our wonderful moderator, our very dear teacher, Dr. Rabia Amir. Please give her a big hand. Thank you, ma'am, for wonderfully moderating this session. Thank you, sir. This brings us to the closure of this event. We appreciate the presence and participation of everyone. A special thanks to our worthy Head of Department of English undergraduates, Dr. Zawar Hussain Hashmi, for supporting us in this endeavor. Now, I'll request all the panelists, moderator, and ELS team members to join us on stage for a group photograph with worthy Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan.
मैं कैंसिल करवा दूँ